even things that are valuable, like family and job and even there's something good about being comfortable, even if you're not completely honest about your gender, being comfortable in a world that values being the gender that you were born as, that says, well, if you can live in that, then that's the way we want you to be, and really want to support you in that. That's how, at least in my day, it started, at least for me and people my age. I understand obstetricians do it differently these days, but back then it was a good, sound, round slap on the rump. And that's the beginning of life, the first breath drawn. As the doctor makes that first announcement, the first name that is given to us, before any other name, and we are called boy or girl. I was born in a snowstorm in March, which not unusual in Buffalo, and I was the firstborn on both sides of my family, so it was a big deal for everyone. I was the oldest, and the fact that I was a grandson to my grandparents was a very big deal. But moved to Georgia when I turned 10. But there it is, and that name, boy or girl, that follows us. It haunts the rest of our life, or it gives joy to the rest of our life, depending on which way your journey will take you. I left high school with the idea that I was going to be an electrical engineer.
Oh.
So I went to Georgia Tech.
Oh, you went to Georgia Tech?
Yes.
Okay.
People sometimes find out that I went to Tech in 1965 and say, well, gosh, there weren't very many women at Georgia Tech in 1965. And I get to say, no, there weren't, and I wasn't one of them. There is a congregation full of names. Look around you and look at all the wonderful people who are here, and imagine all of the names that have been given joyfully in birth to boys and girls. And then there are some of us for whom that name becomes something awkward and strange, something that we have to try to live up to, try to imagine ourselves as being, and we struggle and wrestle and try to express that as best we can, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, and sometimes even for a lifetime. I did 2 years of an electrical engineering degree, and it was a pretty tough time for me for lots of personal reasons. I became very depressed. I had been struggling with a gender identity issue since I was 10.
Since you were 10.
And that, plus the pressures of the education and trying to live up to people's expectations, I really became quite depressed at the age of 20. And I actually left Georgia Tech without telling my parents. Applied to Davidson. Couldn't get in because of the timing. It was too late to get in for the next year, so I applied to Georgia State as a transient student, and then went off to church camp for the summer to just get away from everything, because I'd been doing engineering work during the summers, and but I wanted to get away completely, so I went to the Presbyterian church camp, and I think in many ways it was probably the best decision that I made in my life to go to that camp that summer, because that's where I met Sigrid,
who became your wife.
Who became my wife, and I realized that the calling to ministry that I had had probably years before, because the calling to ministry for me was something that sort of emerged out of my transgender experience. I can't tell you how it happened. I can't tell you why it happened at 10. I can give you some ideas. I mean, at 10 years old, you're beginning to become aware of a larger world around you. At 10 years old, remember, it's the 4th or 5th grade. It's the time when the first buds of adolescence begin to blossom in the lives of especially the girls, because they tend to be a little earlier than the boys. So those things are beginning to happen, and for many of us, it was the first time that we were ever alone.
Both parents were working, and both sisters were in split sessions in a different school, and I locked every door in the house, double-checked every door in the house, went into the powder room, locked the powder room door. I mean, I was really locked in, and pulled gobs of toilet paper off of the toilet paper roll and stuck them in my t-shirt to make breasts. And looked at myself in the mirror, and it just, the most mixed up, awesome feeling just came over me. I couldn't describe it. I felt a mixture of shame and awe, and it made no sense to me, what I was doing or why I was doing it. I've since learned that my classmates were all doing the same things. The girls were going home and doing that because they were anticipating the growth of their breasts. And the boys were going and doing it, but they were not doing it by themselves like I was. They were doing it with the other little boys because they were making fun of the girls whose breasts were developing. So, we all had exactly the same experience, but for different reasons. The thing that happened, though, was I found myself really swept up in this powerful sense that I wanted to grow up to be a woman. I knew that I wasn't. I mean, I was a pretty bright kid. It was 1957, and we were living in Georgia, and I was smart enough to know that I better not say anything about that to anybody. So I kept it to myself. But it was a very hard thing to hold on to for a 10-year-old. I believed at the time, because I'd never heard of anyone say anything to me that indicated that anyone else in the world ever had a feeling like that. It was like, this was a unique idea, that a little boy could want to grow up to be a woman was something I never heard of from anywhere. And so I really thought that I was broken. I thought that there was something basically wrong with me. And that if people found out, that I would be lost. So I'd better keep it a secret.
When a newspaper article appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the headlines of which said, "Ex-Marine becomes bride," and I knew immediately what it meant, and read the story of someone who had gone through, served his time as a Marine, undergone sex reassignment surgery in Denmark. No, I guess his was in Morocco. And had become a woman. And the account was of her wedding dress and all. I was transfixed by the story. I suddenly had a new name, one that I dare not speak, but one that I held and I kept carefully. I wrapped it up in a piece of foil. We didn't have plastic back then. And I wrapped it in foil. I put it on the end of an electrical wire and hung it in the wall in my bedroom behind the intercom, which I removed for the purposes of hiding it, terrified that anyone would find it because it would immediately give me away. I think it's still there.
It was about the same time that my family started attending a little Presbyterian church about 4 blocks away from the house. The pastor's name was Harold Miner, and the director of Christian education was Willeen Terry. Very significant people in my life. They both had a universal message that was the sort of the core of their ministry for this little church that was brand new. It was a satellite church from a big church here in Atlanta. And the message was this, that one, that God knows you all the way through to the very marrow of your bones. There is nothing about you that God doesn't know about. which of course to someone like me would have been a devastating thing to hear, except that the other part of the message was, and God loves you all the way to the very marrow of your bones. With every secret you have, God embraces you.
So he knows everything about you, and he still loves you.
Not just still loves you, really loves you.
Really loves you. Really loves
It's not like he loves you in spite of this.
you. Right.
It's that it's who you are, and you are who God loves.
Mm-hmm.
It was an unusual message, I have to tell you, for the South, for Georgia. You know, this happened to be the Presbyterian church just down the street from where we lived that was convenient to go to. You know, God works in mysterious ways, and I'm just certain that God was guiding all of the things that were making that happen, because it was a saving message for me. You know, I still felt like I was broken. You know, I still felt like I was unlike other kids, but I didn't feel lost. You know, that was a fundamental difference for me. I knew that there was a place that I belonged in the world, and the church was it. So, you know, in a sense, I've often thought that I didn't have much choice in the matter of becoming a Presbyterian minister, and I did try the engineering thing for a couple of years. But when I went to Camp Calvin, which is what it was at the time, good Presbyterian camp, you know, John Calvin, experiencing myself working with the campers there was just an overwhelming sense of being in place. I was just in the right place. And there was always this kind of motivation inside of me that was you know, I felt an incredible amount of pain about myself, and I was intuitive enough to know that other people felt that too. And it wasn't my pain, but I knew that kids felt, you know, I was sensitive to shy children and kids who struggled with disabilities or a problem that made them stand apart from the other kids. And so, you know, it was I was highly motivated to work with and be a part of their lives and try to help them. And so, you know, being a helper became sort of ingrained in me.
A beautiful, bright, strong woman. She came out of the woods. Can you imagine that? She really honestly came out of the woods at a church camp like an Indian princess, and there she was, and I fell head over heels, absolutely, unbelievably, and for all of my life, in love with her.
I fell in love. And I had, one of the things that I sort of comforted myself with through adolescence was this idea that that probably all boys wanted to be girls. That, you know, that this was a universal boy thing, that they really wanted to be girls, and the secret was that it was a secret, you know, so that nobody talked about it at all. So it was something that was just there, but it was so taboo that nobody would ever say anything. So there was this thing. And then what happened is, when you fell in love with a girl, and of course this was in 1957, being gay was, I'd never even heard of being gay. You know, I knew transgender stuff long before gay stuff. So, you know, I never heard of being gay, so the idea of falling in love with a boy just didn't ever occur to me. But it did, you know, falling in love with a girl, what would happen was, when I fell in love, all these feelings of wanting to be a woman would become part of our connection with each other. So, in a kind of a Jungian way, you know, this projection of my female persona onto my partner would be a part of the intertwining of our psyches. And it was very sophisticated for a teenager. I thought, you know, I'd never heard of Jung, so, you know, I came up with that all on my own. And I met Sigrid, and I mean, I really did. I fell in love hard, and she was and is an amazing woman, and to me, I mean, she's it. And I really. Actually, it worked. I stopped having all of this desire to be a woman. It lasted probably about 9 months, long enough for us to get married. And then about 3 months after our wedding, there I was standing in front of the mirror in our bedroom, dressed in her clothes, and it was a devastating experience. It was just incredible because, not only was I not cured, I had now connected my life to someone else whom I loved. I just loved her. Still do.
Did she talk about, did you share any of this with her, or you didn't?
I became very depressed. So much so that she was worried. She wanted me to see a counselor. She was afraid that I was suicidal. I might have been, actually. I was despondent. I couldn't stand the possibility of losing her, and I knew that if I said anything to her, that I would. It was...
But you went on to have 2 daughters together.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you were married for 27 years.
27 years.
So how did...
And we celebrated our 40th anniversary in December of '07. So this December we'll celebrate our 42nd wedding anniversary.
42nd wedding anniversary.
Although we've been divorced for...
well, how did you get from the beginning of your marriage to 27 years later? Can you capsulize that?
I don't know.
That's
27 years. What probably happened is I think I took a vow that I was going to keep this as a secret forever. I didn't want to hurt her with it. I didn't want to hurt me with it. So I decided that I was going to have to hold it as a secret. And I discovered that I could stand it by working.
I solved the problem by becoming an aholic, probably a workaholic. From the age of 20 through the age of 40, I earned 4 degrees while working full-time. I became licensed in 3 different professions. I became ordained as a minister in the Presbyterian Church. I was a good father for 2 daughters. I wrote a dissertation. I built a psychotherapy practice from the ground up in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. I built a sailboat and sailed it in the Atlantic Ocean, built my first house, and on and on and on. From all outward appearances, everything looked like it was going great. Am I telling a story that you all know about? Of course.
As I got more and more depressed, I started having to tell her more and more about my gender stuff openly, and she began to understand more and more about it, until it sort of got to the place where I finally had to say, well, I've always really wanted to be a woman, and it's being enough of a problem now that there's not much else that I can do other than confront that. And
because you kind of had accomplished everything you wanted to accomplish professionally, or you had these degrees, and then
I started talking about wanting to go to medical school, and she said, no, you can do that, but it'll be without me. So I knew, I did not want to lose her. That was sort of the big controlling thing, was to not lose Sigrid, because she was and is the best part of my life. So, I couldn't lose her. That was not an option. But I really did. I thought, well, I could just start this whole thing over. We could become impoverished again, go off to medical school, and everything will be just fine. I'll have to work, what more work could there be than, 6 or 7 years of medical school and post-medical training.
You can
so I
think
thought,
about
wow, it'd be
anything
great,
else. Fabulous,
it works great. but And I realized that was unreasonable, and I knew what I was doing, and so.
And she also said, "No, I'm not gonna do that with you."
I'm not going to do that with you. Yeah, she said that, and then she said she came to me later and said, when our daughters leave home, when they and they were near that. I mean, they were both like in their late teens, and she said that when they go, I'm going to, and she said, I love you. She said, I will always love you. That's never been an issue, but I can't handle your depression. And she said, your depression just is killing me, and I don't want to die. I don't want my spirit to be killed. I don't want you to let you do that to me. And
did you talk to her about transitioning?
Not at that point.
You didn't. Okay. So the marriage ended, and then you
It's kind of what happened was she had been taking some female hormones. Menopausal stuff. And one morning I was helping get our daughter ready for school. I mean, she requires assistance, dressing and all that stuff. So I was helping her get ready to go to school in the morning, and Sigrid came in and had this bottle of Premarin, which is a really powerful female hormone. And she said, this medication isn't working for me. I got a new doctor and new medications, and they're working great. And she put the pill bottle in the medicine chest. Why she would put pills that she's not going to be taking in the medicine chest, beyond me. But my mind was like a steel trap. Female hormones, I knew exactly what those things were and what they were for. And so I started stealing them. One pill at a time, and an amazing thing happened. I took these pills over the space of 24 hours. What had been a dark, insidious depression. We're talking about the kind of depression where I would leave home angry after dinner, and my family was convinced that I was going out to kill myself. That kind of depression, really bad. And in 24 hours, turned completely around. Life was good again. And it was so remarkable that my partners in my therapy practice were concerned. One of the earmarks of a severely depressed person who has decided to commit suicide is that the depression lifts. It's sort of natural. Someone's feeling really pressed down with their depression, and it's agonizing and intolerable. So they make a decision that they're going to commit suicide. So there's an end. They feel relieved, and they feel better. And my partners were convinced that I'd made a suicide plan. And so I had to reassure them that I had not. But it was so remarkable. It was like between night and day. It was just unbelievable. And it was great, except that the pills were starting to disappear. I was taking them and they were going away, and I was afraid that Sigrid would see that I was stealing them, and I was even more afraid that I was going to run out. So I cooked up a plan to forge a prescription, which of course made all kinds of sense. In Georgia, it's a felony for a licensed professional, which I am, to do such. But I was planning on doing it anyway. I was going to forge a prescription so I could replace the pills so that she wouldn't see that I'd taken them, and so I could get my own supply. And I woke up one morning and I realized, I've been living this life of mendacity for decades, and here I was planning on doing something that not only threatened my license and my career, I could possibly go to jail, and I could put my family in huge financial problem because they would lose all of their income with what I was bringing home. And I realized I was doing a really stupid, very self-destructive thing. And that was the place at which it all turned around. I realized that I could no longer ignore what I needed to do. And that's when I started getting appropriate treatment. And I began to travel every 2 weeks to Baltimore, Maryland. I flew there to see Margaret LaMarche every other Friday afternoon and begin to unravel the huge mess that I had made in my life.
It's amazing how it comes down to one thought, one sentence, but it did. I had been weaving this story for weeks. I had written pages and pages and pages to my therapist, trying to explain all the ways and try to figure out some way out of this. Please tell me I'm a cross-dresser. Please tell me I'm gay. Please tell me I'm something, anything other than this. And I kept saying, I'm confused about my gender. Margaret, I'm confused about what my gender is. And finally, in about our 4th or 5th session, Margaret said, Eric, just a second. You're not confused about your gender. You've never been confused about your gender. You're just afraid that other people aren't going to be able to accept it.
And it was like, it clicked. I knew that that's what it was. She was a backslid Roman Catholic from Prague, Czechoslovakia. What a woman. Margaret was her name. She was just fabulous. And she said, for a Presbyterian minister, you don't have much faith. And, you know, she was right. She was right on the money. And I went home, and I told Sigrid. I flew home, because she was in Baltimore, so I flew up there to see her. I flew back to Atlanta, went home, told Sigrid that I decided that I really needed to do a gender transition. We cried. We stayed up half the night together. And she said she couldn't be married to me. She didn't think she could be married to me because she just couldn't handle thinking about that. But that she would be there for me, that she would not leave, that she was going to. And she has been every step of the way. Marrying her was the smartest thing I ever did in my life. Anyway, it was tough giving up the marriage. I didn't really want to.
So you would have stayed married?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I think, there was some sense in her that she would have to sort of identify as a lesbian if she wanted. She really saw me as a woman. She from the first time she ever saw me dressed up, she never saw me as a man ever after that again. And I guess it was just because she realized, that this really did sort of click with me. It wasn't something that I didn't have to try to be a woman. I didn't have to play the role or practice it or anything. It was just there for me. And she couldn't handle being my sexual partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that, but she still loves me, and I see her regularly. So if I'm lucky when this interview is over with, I'll get to talk to her on the phone.
It's an issue touchy for most and volatile for a church. Should a minister be allowed to continue as an ordained pastor after a sex change? As we first told you last night at 11, 2 pastors here are at the heart of this controversy. 11 News reporter Steen Miles has more.
It is an issue for which Georgia Presbyterians say there is no precedent. Transsexual ministers like Carla Pridgeon and Erin Swenson.
I, as most everybody else, am wrestling with does the sex change make a difference in the effectiveness of ministry and even into the moral and ethical issues.
Action against Reverend Erin Swenson is pending. In the meantime, she says the sex change has made her a better pastor.
Even though I was probably pretty good as a pastor before, I'm far better now.
I've known her as Eric for many years, and it's hard for me to say Erin and her.
A decision on Swenson's fate is expected in July.
In the beginning, it went really well. I actually approached the church to change my name on the roll because, at the time, there was this big thing about not keeping gender records, because of political correctness. So the only thing I asked was for them to change my name on the roll. Of course, they asked me what name I wanted to change it to, which, of course, was a reasonable question. And, I said, well, I want to change it to Erin Katrina Swenson. And they said, why do you want to change it to that? And I said, well, I'm changing my gender expression to something a little more feminine. Boy, talk about skirting the issue. I thought this would be a little more appropriate. And they said, well, you know, usually it's easy to change your name, but this is going to be a little more difficult. But the committee did great. I gave them a bunch of materials. They wanted to know, you know, what my process was and what I was doing. And they interviewed a couple folks. They read some books and decided it was okay. And they went to the Presbyterian meeting to tell the Presbyterian meeting to change my name on the roll. And there was one minister there who stood up and said, no, I have an objection. And unfortunately, I mean, his personal objection was sort of a difficult, virulent one. He couched it, though, in very reasonable terms. He said that as far as he'd been able to find out, that no Christian minister, let alone Protestant minister or Presbyterian, had ever changed sex and stayed ordained, so that what they were doing that day could not only set precedents for the Presbyterian Church, but all of Protestantism and Christendom combined. So, he managed to expand it to not just changing my name, which is what I wanted. I mean, what I really wanted was to change my name and go on with my life. I wasn't going to make this into... I had no intention of being a political anything. I didn't want to change the world. I just wanted to change how I lived my life. Didn't want to change my career. I didn't want to change my family. Didn't want to change my city. Didn't want to change anything. Just my gender. That's all. Just that part. And so I was hoping that they would just sort of let me slide around the back. And it didn't work. And it got into the newspapers. And it became this huge, big thing. And it was... and of course, all of my hopes and dreams that it would be quiet were sort of dashed.
And you became they wrote about you in Newsweek and
well, yeah, the Presbytery fought over it for another year and a half after that. A very painful time for me. And then that culminated in a second meeting. And another report from the committee. There's this committee on the ministry, which is sort of like the personnel committee for the Presbyterian Church. And they reported again, because I had done my work well. I learned to be an activist.
I was thinking that it almost sounds like this made you an accidental activist, because when you get this resistance, this opposition, you just sort of hunkered down.
It's more that yes, because the issue begins to expand. It starts to grow, and it grows inside of you. It did inside of me. It was like this thing inside of me that I just couldn't. It wouldn't go out. It wouldn't go away, and I began to understand that there were other people who were struggling with the same thing. Shortly after the very first newspaper article came out, I was getting all kinds of communications from people, positive and negative. And there was a voicemail from an older woman on my voicemail, my professional voicemail. So I had to answer the call because it could be a client. But I was convinced that she was going to read me the riot act about what I was doing, changing sex, being immoral and all. And found out, to my delight, that this was she was in her 60s. I think she was 68. And she was one of the very first patients through the Johns Hopkins Gender Reassignment Clinic in the 1960s. And she had seen the article in the newspaper about me. We got together and had breakfast. Had this marvelous discussion. She had been active in this Presbyterian church next to her retirement community for 8 or 9 years since her husband had died. Played the piano. We were both musicians. That's another way that I was a fairly accomplished musician. Still am, I guess. And so we shared all this stuff. And at the breakfast table at the Majestic in Atlanta, here we were eating this greasy food, eating breakfast, and I put my hands across the table and I said, I was so delighted. I said, how wonderful to be able to meet a fellow transgender Presbyterian. And she said, "Oh, but I'm not a Presbyterian."
Oh, but I'm not a Presbyterian.
And I said, "Well, I thought, I'm sorry, I thought you said that you were active in the Presbyterian church next to your retirement place." And she said, "Yes, you love that church." She said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Well, tell me what's up." She said, "Well, I never could join the church." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, I didn't think that God wanted me to join the church because, you know, of who I was, who I am. And she said, that's why when I saw a newspaper article about a Presbyterian minister who was like me, I just had to call you up. And that was the moment that I became an activist. Even you know, there's something good about being comfortable, even if you're not completely honest about your gender, you know, being comfortable in a world that values being the gender that you were born as, you know, that says, well, if you can live in that, then that's the way we want you to be, and really want to support you in that. You know, but there's a kind of courage that I think emerges in people who, you know, decide that they need to live more authentically, and really be willing to let go of those things. So I realized that, you know, I didn't have the privilege of just casting it aside like it was a used piece of paper, because it's not. My ordination was something sacred and something given to me in a different way than to be something that I could just throw away.
So you were still an ordained minister?
I am indeed.
Yeah.
Member in good standing of the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta, Presbyterian Church, USA.
I done gone through too much hell to get where I am now, to turn around and go back. And I have found that, you know, we live in the good old USA, but I'll tell you what, there's a bunch of idiot, ignorant, prejudiced, bigoted people out there.
Really?
Who don't know.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, they don't know anything, and yet they want to stand there and mistreat you. And they don't even know what the heck you are. And yet they want to sit there and just defy you and abuse you and mistreat you. And I've been treated for major depression for the last 6 years. And I just got some great news the other day. Because of that, I cannot get health insurance. They rejected me. The company that I had group insurance with since 2000 rejected me on an individual policy because I have major depression.
I realized that the work that I had to do wasn't just about making the world safe for my family, that there were untold numbers of people around me whose lives were really severely limited by the fact that they believed that by being transgender they were unacceptable to God, unacceptable to their communities, and maybe even at some level unacceptable to themselves. And I really knew about all of that stuff. And that really has sort of fashioned the central core of what's become my activism. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act is a fully inclusive act that will provide for employment protections not only for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, but it also includes gender identity and expression, which includes transgender folks. And the religious curriculum has been put together to really address, especially in those congressional districts around the country that are kind of sitting on the edge of being able to be supportive. The congressman or the senator is in favor of employment non-discrimination, but isn't quite so sure about this transgender thing because they hear all kinds of really ugly things about transgender people. And so the faith education piece has been a way to really help clarify what this transgender thing is, and having ministers and other faith leaders go around the country and present this curriculum in those congressional districts has been a very useful tool, which I think has really helped, and it looks like employment non-discrimination may possibly be a reality. There are people of faith who believe that it is a matter of faith that our faith communities open their doors and fully include these people in our communities. I was part of the first one, and it was quite successful.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful picture on the HRC website of me with my finger up in the air in the U.S. Capitol behind me, and it looks so robust and so political. And what people don't know is I'm leading us in a rendition of "This Little Light of Mine," which is really what this is all about. This isn't about big, powerful, massive things. This is about just simply being a human being. It's simply about being me. And it's about having the basic respect to allow other people to be themselves in whatever way feels right for them to be.
If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am, people who were forgotten by their families, who weren't even claimed as children anymore, whose families were ashamed of them, people who were lost, whose pastors were even terrified of visiting them. People singing this song. If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am. And one of them was transgendered and was afraid to claim that. Afraid to know it and speak it out loud, most especially in church. But there I was with my brothers and sisters in Christ, singing. If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am. If anybody asks you who I am, tell them I am a child of God.